Well, Greece's prime minister has hit back at criticism of the Greek Coast Guard's handling of a migrant boat tragedy earlier this week. He said the anger should be directed at people smugglers. The Greek Coast Guard is under pressure to explain why it didn't help an overcrowded fishing boat with several hundred migrants on board before it sank, despite being in contact with the vessel.
With every passing hour, it's becoming more likely that hundreds more people now lie buried in the deep blue waters of the Ionian Sea. The search and rescue operation has been extended, but there is little hope of finding anyone else alive. In the Greek capital Athens, hope has turned to anger and mourning to blame. The question many here want answered: how could this happen with a Coast Guard so nearby?
We are deeply shocked by the shipwreck, with dozens dead and hundreds missing in Pylos. This is not just another accident, this is a predestined crime.
Criticism has been mounting after it became known that a Greek patrol boat escorted the fishing trawler for hours but didn't intervene. The Coast Guard's defence: the vessel was moving steadily towards Italy and refused almost all assistance.
But that's something that we have seen over recent months as coastal states challenge the notion of distress, with the hope that the boat will continue its journey to reach the Italian search and rescue area of operation.
An investigation has been launched into the tragedy, which comes just over a week after the European Union agreed to a long overdue reform of the bloc's migrant and asylum rules. Once fully approved, the deal will allow member states to fast-track asylum procedures on the EU's external borders and more easily send refused asylum seekers to so-called safe countries outside the bloc.
A historic moment, with member states finally agreeing a way forward on migration. But that historic moment has been overshadowed by yet another shipwreck in the Mediterranean.
Brussels puts the blame on people smugglers. An EU summit on the issue is expected to take place later in the month.
And I am convinced that we can find a way that respects borders and that is fair and humane with those in need for protection, that is firm with those who are not eligible, and that is strong against the traffickers who are exploiting the most vulnerable people on our planet. That is the European way.
But for critics, Wednesday's tragedy is just the latest proof that the European way is failing. NGOs and rights groups argue the recurring deaths at sea are a direct result of Europe's moves to shut the bloc off from the rest of the world. They call it the Fortress Europe policy and say it leaves vulnerable refugees with no option to seek asylum legally and safely. A tragedy waiting to happen. That's how many protesters in Athens see it. For the victims of the latest one, they've released dozens of lanterns into the sky, a tribute to the possibly hundreds of souls lost in the Mediterranean Sea.
To speak to us more about this, I'm very pleased to welcome Neda Noyakia. She is the head of Migration Policy Europe at the Heinrich Böll Foundation and based in Thessaloniki, Greece. We've just heard some of these very serious accusations against the Greek Coast Guard. In your view, was this a terrible accident or a crime?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for putting this on the agenda and for having me. Well, it's not for me to now say whether this was a crime or not. We have, this was mentioned, I believe, prior, that the Supreme Court prosecutor ordered an official investigation, and now we have to see the outcome of this investigation. But what is important to say is that there are severe questions when it comes to the responsible bodies, being the Hellenic Coast Guard, Frontex, the Greek authorities, even the Italian and the Maltese authorities. There have been investigations by independent journalists such as Weir Solomon here in Greece that prove that there has been a call, an SOS sent by alarm phone hours before the deadly shipwreck happened. So indeed, it has to be investigated thoroughly and independently, and those responsible have to be held accountable.
Yeah, and these details just add to the scale of this tragedy. The European Union has now agreed on a plan to reform its refugee and asylum policy. Will this help prevent such tragedies from happening in the future?
Well, we see this being the declared goal. However, I have doubts whether any form of procedures at the external borders will help to prevent deaths on the Mediterranean. I mean, what we have been witnessing for years is a policy of border securitization that indeed leads to more deadly shipwrecks. I mean, the pure fact that this ship went through or aimed for the Calabrian route is indeed a result of Greece repeatedly committing illegal border violations and so-called pushbacks. So I think this is where we really have to now put our attention at, and also the fact that we are lacking safe and legal routes to protection and into the European Union. And I think it's quite telling that both former Prime Minister Mitsotakis, but also EU Council President Charles Michel mentioned the aspect of trafficking, and that they have to stop trafficking in order to prevent death, rather than looking into the EU border policies and the EU policies towards people in need of protection, actually.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on DW News to share that. That is Neda Nourakia from the Heinrich Böll Foundation in Thessaloniki. Many thanks.
Thanks.